I'm Justin Silverman of the New England First Amendment Coalition. Thank you for joining us for these lessons on state public record laws and the Federal Freedom of Information Act. This is the fourth round of lessons that all build on one another. First, we discuss the law itself, what it covers and how it can be used. Then, we invited a local journalist to share 3 specific requests they made and the stories that resulted. Our previous round of lessons focused on the appeals process, what to do when your request is denied. And now we again have a local journalist to share their experience using the appeals process to obtain records for their reporting. Links to all videos, as well as other valuable information, can be found at nefac.org/FOI guide. This round of lessons is brought to you by NEFAC with support from the Rhode Island Foundation, the SPJ Foundation, MuckRock, SPJ New England, and the New England Society of News Editors. Thank you again for joining us. Now, here's NEFAC's Emily Sweeney to introduce you to your instructor.
Hey everybody, I'm Emily Sweeney from the Boston Globe, and I want to thank you for joining us for this webinar, which is part of our ongoing series on public records laws. And with us today is Eli Sherman, and he's an Emmy and Murrow award-winning journalist at WPRI in Providence, and he's going to walk us through his own personal experience with the appeals process in the Ocean State. So thank you, Eli.
Thank you, Emily. I appreciate that introduction. Just quickly before I get started, I want to say that fighting for public records is oftentimes not a quick process, especially if the record holder is trying to hide something or more simply just disagrees with you that what you're after is public. But my approach has always been that records created by taxpayer money are public unless someone can prove to me otherwise. And fighting for that information, especially if you have good reason to believe that it's in the public's interest, is a crucial part of being a journalist. So just one thing that I would recommend going into any APRA battle, first off, is to read the law. It is a very important thing to understand if you're going to get into arguments with people about whether or not public records are public or not. And it can be sort of a daunting challenge to enter into some of these fights, but hopefully going through some of these examples, it'll take some of the mystery out of it. The first thing that you should understand about APRA in Rhode Island is that there are a lot of exemptions. In fact, they list the exemptions on the law, and they start at A and they go all the way through Z back to AA. So there are more exemptions in APRA in Rhode Island than there are letters in the alphabet. So just familiarizing yourself with those exemptions will help you when you're trying to fight it later. So I'm just going to run through 1 or 2 quick examples of APRA battles that I've been in. The first, one of them actually ended up not getting records. The second fight ended up with records, but both of these examples were, I believe, show that the power of being able to use the appeal process. And so the first one happened at the beginning of 2020. It was right at the start of the pandemic. And a couple months before cases started popping up in the Northeast, then House Speaker Nicholas Mattiello, he ordered this very unusual audit of the Rhode Island Convention Center. And it was happening at the same time that a close personal friend of his was caught up in a personnel scandal. And his critics always took the audit to be retaliatory because the convention center wasn't giving his pal a pass on the personnel issue. And so we broke that story. And a couple weeks later, the speaker gave a long interview to the Providence Journal. And at that time, he explained that the reason why he ordered that audit was because his friend had come to him and he had said, listen, here is this list of all of these improprieties and financial problems at the Rhode Island Convention Center. And the speaker said he looked at those, and that's why he ordered the audit to see what was going on there. After seeing his comments in the newspaper, I quickly put in a APRA request for that list because we wanted to see, okay, what were those specific reasons that led you to believe that there were all these financial problems, all this, bad behavior that required the audit. I won't dwell on the APRA side because we're focusing on the appeal side. So a few days later, the JCLS, and that's the Joint Committee on Legislative Services, which is the administrative body of the General Assembly in Rhode Island, they handle all of the APRA requests for the State House. They responded saying they denied my request, and they cited exemption M in the APRA law, which is basically says that they're allowed to shield public records if they are, quote, correspondences of or to elected officials with or relating to those they represent. And in this example, that friend that was at the convention center also happened to be the speaker's constituent. So they made the argument that their correspondence together wasn't subject to public records. Now, the other thing that they argued was that they thought that it would violate their privacy, that for some reason showing this correspondence would be problematic for their privacy. It was all bogus. So this is the letter. Basically, when they gave me the denial, there are three options you can go through. You can either accept it at face value and say, okay, you denied it. Maybe I'll write a story about how you're refusing to share these records. Option two is that you can appeal it directly to the head of the entity that you just APRA'd, that you just asked public records for. This option has always struck me as a little odd because I don't know why an entity would change its mind and give you records after it had just denied them. And then the third option is to go directly to the Rhode Island Attorney General's office and appeal there, and you actually file a complaint. And so that's what I did in this instance. The JCLS is that administrative body of the General Assembly. So I filed a complaint with the Attorney General's office. I basically argued, I know that's a lot of words, I basically argued that these documents were of a significant public interest. That phrase is important in the public records argument because you need to show that what you're trying to get at is going to help the public understand government, how their taxpayer dollars are being used. In other words, if you're seeking information that nobody cares about, you may not have great legs to stand on if you're trying to convince an impartial third party to provide you with that information. So always trying to show why this information is important, I think, is a key part of the appeal process. So after I filed this complaint, that's when things got a little funky. Under normal circumstances, the JCLS would have had 10 days from the time that I filed my complaint to respond with some response to why they think that their decision to deny my records was correct. It was, again, the beginning of 2020, and the emails started coming in from the JCLS attorney who was really dragging his feet. He was pointing at the pandemic saying, oh, the legislator being shut down is preventing me from being able to do this response. Attorney General's office, can you please give me more time? They'd ask for more time, but they wouldn't be specific about how much more time they wanted. I continuously argued against these requests, pointing out that with the legislator shut down, these part-time attorneys that do this work actually would have more time on their hands to be able to draft and submit a response to my complaint. And I just show these correspondence back and forth because I think it's really important to know that there is a very rigid structure to how you appeal public records requests. But every single time you do it, it's slightly different, and you always have to be ready to be a little nimble. You have to continuously make your case for why it is that you're after these records. You have all these correspondence that your viewers and your readers, they may never see all this work that you put into it, but it's really, really important if you're trying to get information. And if you're going to be successful, you just have to be thoughtful, clear, diligent, because this is a legal process. And in most cases, I'm guessing if you're a journalist, you're not also a lawyer. So just really keeping after it and being diligent, I can't say that word enough, and these appeal processes really will go a long way. So in this case, it was interesting, the fight actually didn't end up in me getting any records, because when the JCLS did finally submit their response, they admitted that this list that they had said existed actually didn't exist. They didn't have it in their possession, so they could not provide it. So in other words, when the speaker did that interview with the Providence Journal, which was now months earlier, he either, misspoke when he said there was a list that was the basis for his audit. That list quickly disappeared and they no longer had it in their possession, or it never actually existed to begin with. Regardless of what happened to that list, I think what is great about the appeal process is that it showed that the top lawmaker in the state, arguably the most powerful lawmaker in the state, was being misleading at best when he was trying to explain the reasons behind why he was ordering this very unusual audit. And we wouldn't have known that if we had not gone through this process to sort of force them to show their hand. Now, in this instance, I actually requested the Attorney General to punish the JCLS, the Speaker of the House, because in my mind, they were sort of thumbing their nose at the APRA process. If they had done this diligently, they would have told me in their denial that these records didn't exist. And they sort of brushed it off as, oh, we didn't mean to say that they existed and we didn't willfully do that. I argued that, they were wasting everybody's time in doing this, and that the Attorney General should send a strong message of deterrence to basically tell them that this is not okay. His office ultimately agreed with my argument and found that the JCLS violated the law. And he sent a long, detailed argument as to why that was the case. And at the end of that, we were able to put together a very compelling story, in my opinion, about all of that process that went into putting this story together, that not only showed that they were being, misleading at best, untruthful, perhaps lying, and that this thing that he was the basis for why he had done this audit wasn't in fact, it wasn't in existence. And just so if you're wondering, Tim White and Ted Nesi, they're my colleagues. We made the editorial decision because I was so involved in the fighting of this and really became part of that process. We made the editorial decision as a newsroom to actually have two other reporters report on it. And so that because I had become part of it, that is, of course, an editorial decision that each newsroom needs to make based on your participation in the process. Okay, so the second example I want to just run through quickly happened last year, and that was a records fight that I had with the soon-to-be governor, Dan McKee's office. At the time, he was ascending up into becoming governor, and because the former governor, Gina Raimondo, she left midterm and to become Commerce Secretary for President Biden. Now, Rhode Island law is clear: when the governor leaves midterm, the lieutenant governor assumes that role. What is less clear, and there's been legislation and debate over how this should work, is how they should choose the lieutenant governor. And in the case of Governor Dan McKee last year, he decided to open up sort of an unusual process in which he would choose the lieutenant governor from a list of applicants. So basically, anyone and their cousin could submit an application to be lieutenant governor of Rhode Island. All you needed was a resume and a cover letter, just like you were applying for any old job, as to why you thought that you would be right for the job. Now, as many of you might have guessed by now, I thought that applicants should be public, and that whole process should be public because, these people were applying for the number 2 job in the state, and under normal circumstances, voters would have chose this person. All of a sudden, it was like something out of Indeed.com, and so I sent a pretty informal request, which you're seeing right here, to the governor's transition team, asking for all the applications and the related documents. A spokesperson responded, and I apologize for this type, it's a little stretched out. But basically, they came back and said, listen, we're not going to release this list of applicants. We want to keep it private because we want to encourage a wide range of qualified applicants from the private and public sector to apply. They also said that they're treating it like an appointment, like they would a cabinet member. Lieutenant governor is separate from the governor. They're a separate position. They don't run like together as a ticket like they do in Massachusetts. It's not a cabinet appointment. It is different than that. I was a little taken aback that they weren't going to provide this information. It just seems so very clear that this was public and should be public. So I sent back a little bit more of a formal email to the spokesperson, just asking them to cite an exemption from the Access to Public Records Act, APRA, that showed why they believe these documents should not be subject to disclosure. And I was almost signaling to them, listen, you need to give me these documents, or I am going to go through an appeal process and get someone to compel you to do it. And I also pointed out that while I appreciated that they wanted to treat it like an appointment, it was not that. So you can see I'm already laying the basis for what will later become my argument to the Attorney General. And this is important when you're thinking about building a case, I guess, is what a lawyer might say. But when you're thinking about where this is all heading, you want to sort of start establishing, okay, I checked this box, I checked this box, I tried this, I tried that. You want to show that you are getting to a point where you need to appeal. Ultimately, they responded. They said that they would release a list of candidates who are going to be interviewed for the position. It was unclear at what point they were going to do interviews. It had come out that already at least 60 people had applied for the job. I didn't know if that meant that they were going to start interviewing people when they whittled it down to 2. It just wasn't clear. And this was all happening pretty quickly. So after I got that response, again, this should look familiar. I submitted a complaint to the Attorney General's office. This is the appeal. And I quickly laid out an argument saying, that they failed to demonstrate the records in dispute, how and why they should be publicly withheld. They didn't cite any exemptions as to why they should withhold this information. I've done this enough times that I know that that is great. If they don't cite any exemptions as to why they're withholding the documents from you, there's a good chance you're going to be able to make an argument to someone that they don't have a good reason why they're not giving them to you. So if you ever see a denial with no exemptions on it, it should be, your eyes should go big. Ultimately, in this case, I did this with my colleague Tim White, and we actually did look up some previous decisions on this one, and we do this periodically depending on the circumstances. But this is a little more advanced. But if you're ever looking for case law, for lack of a better word, they're advisory opinions, you can go to the Attorney General's website and you can search based on exemptions or keywords, and you can find past decisions that the office has made on issues, and you should read them, because there's a good chance that someone along the way had a similar issue as you did, and they made a decision on that, and you can point to that. On the flip side, sometimes people who are denying your records, they will also cite these, and then you should go read them, because oftentimes they don't read them, and they don't say the things that they're arguing that they say. So if you go to them, you read them, you learn what they say, you can respond by saying, they don't say that. And so it's important, it is tedious and it is more work and it is it's you got to keep after it. But there is an avenue to getting information. This is another one. If you have access to any databases like Westlaw, that is also a very powerful tool if you're trying to find cases. I believe the Attorney General's advisory opinions are in there as well. So that's just a side note. This issue was happening in real time. It was happening quickly. Unlike the JCLS dispute that I was in that happened over a few months, this application process was happening quickly. So we made the editorial decision to actually write about the fact that the Lieutenant Governor's office was not disclosing this information, that they decided that they were going to keep it secret. And we were upfront with people that we didn't think that was right, and we had filed a complaint with the Attorney General's office to try and get that information. It resonates with viewers, it resonates with readers when they know that you're actually fighting to try and get the information that might better help them better understand what it is that's going on around them. A day after we filed our complaint, the soon-to-be governor had a change of heart. He then his office reached out and said, listen, we're gonna release them. And he made an announcement that Friday that they were gonna release it. This came less than 24 hours after the Attorney General alerted his office that I had filed a complaint and that they needed to respond to the complaint and explain why it is that they had decided to withhold documents that I argued were public, and they did not lay a very good case for why they shouldn't be public. So this example here, I think, helps show that you can also use it as leverage to try and get the information by reporting at the same time that you're doing your appeal. Tell people what you're doing. It helps just sort of everyone understand why it is that you can't just get that information instantaneous, that there is a process behind it. And we got another headline out of it. We were able to show that they had thought one way one day, and the next day they thought a different way. So a week or so goes by, and they released them. And there were upward of 60 applications. I think that number rose above 80 ultimately, and they released all of them. They released the cover letters, the applications, and it showed it was an astonishing number of local, state lawmakers, senators, business leaders, community organizers, private attorneys that just came out of the woodwork who were really interested in actually serving in this position. And, it would have all happened behind the scenes. And instead we were able to give Rhode Islanders a front row seat into how the government was choosing, arguably the next person in charge if Governor Dan McKee were to leave midterm. So just an important thing, it's small. It might just be a headline that you see in the day, but there was quite a lot of back and forth that happened behind the scenes to try and get that information out there. And ultimately we were pleased with that. So I think that it's important, after a week or so, they followed through with the names and applications. So I filed a withdrawal with the Attorney General's office, which you have to do. We had gotten the responsive documents at that point, so the Attorney General closed that complaint. I just want to say that it happens all the time where you get these blanket no's in public records fights. Public bodies either, they just don't want to deal with it, or they think if they say no, you're just going to go away. And in some cases, you're not going to have a great argument for why something is public. If it is truly exempt under the law, ongoing investigations of criminal nature, you're just not going to get those documents. And understanding the law will help you understand that's not a fight that you necessarily want to go down. But a lot of times they have no argument, or they're just using an argument because it's convenient, and then they think they won't have to deal with you. And by forcing yourself to go through the appeal process, you're not only fighting for information, which is your job, but also you're signaling to public bodies that you're not going to go away. And I just think that that is a really important thing that journalists should be trying to signal to public bodies that, hey, you can say no, but I'm going to still try and get that information. And I said at the beginning, this is very time consuming. And I currently have 3 complaints ongoing in front of the Attorney General's office, along with an advisory opinion that a public body requested out of uncertainty whether they should disclose information from a developer who argues that his plans are trade secrets, which they're not. And as you can imagine, keeping tabs on all of that is, it does take a lot, and arguing those and corresponding. And the way I just think about all this is that I treat it like breaking news. If you are a reporter in some capacity, you've dealt with breaking news. When you get a denial, when you get an email, when you get anything related to the app or process, just put the same energy into responding to it as you would into a breaking news story. And it forces you to just deal with it. Because I find that if you say, oh, I can't get to that right now, a day goes by, a week goes by, and all of a sudden it's fallen through the cracks. And you're like, dang, I really wish that I had followed through with that. But if you force yourself to respond at that moment, like you would to a breaking news situation, now you have it done immediately. I don't send them immediately. I usually wait a day and come back to it just to read it with a clear mind. But it did force me to deal with it at that point. Now, just last, before, if there are any questions, I want to say that I'm always interested in hearing about other people's APRA fights. If you are in one, or you want to bat around an idea, or you just want to exchange battle scars or whatever it is, please reach out to me. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff.
Eli, thank you so much for doing this, and thank you everybody who tuned in. And yeah, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me.